Welcome to the Dr. Lori Mars podcast, where she interviews experts in health and science, sharing their expertise so you can live your healthiest life.
I'm Dr. Lori Marvis. Now, if you've ever taken a multivitamin, you've probably assumed it's giving you everything that you need. But the truth is, most women's multivitamins are filled with nutrients that you're already getting from your food, while skipping the ones your body really needs to thrive. And that's where the For Her Essential System comes in. I co-created the For Her Essential System with Complement, a science-backed supplement system that provides the essential nutrients women need for optimal health. It's designed to support hormonal balance, energy, bone health, and much more, with just the nutrients we struggle to get without the unnecessary fillers. What sets the For Her Essential System apart is that it is specifically formulated for women, with dosages based on the latest research, ensuring you get what you need, so you can thrive in everything you do, all day, every day. Now, to learn more and try it for yourself, visit the link in the description below and use the code for an exclusive discount. Take control of your health with the nutrients that matter most. This episode of the podcast is proudly sponsored by Fit Vegan Coaching, the world's leading whole food, plant-based body recomposition program for Gen X and baby boomers. Founded by Maxime, whose personal journey began after losing his ex-fiancée to breast cancer, Fit Vegan Coaching is on a mission to disease-proof the world through the transformative power of plant-based eating and fitness. This program is the Rolls-Royce of plant-based coaching, offering all-inclusive services, personalized plans, world-class accountability, lifelong support, and more. Say goodbye to the yo-yo dieting and embrace a lasting transformation that will rev up your metabolism even post-transformation. Ready to take charge of your health and vitality? Head over to fitvegan.ca, that's fitvegan.ca, and mention Dr. Lori for exclusive bonus savings when you sign up. Don't miss this opportunity to join the movement towards a healthier, fitter, and more vibrant you. Welcome to the podcast. I'm Dr. Lori Marvis, and today I'm really excited to interview Selene Yeager. This is really unique because she's got a really cool experience with all sorts of things as a sports writer and starting actually in competitive biking, off-road biking, right? At a later age. This is going to be really fun. And then we're going to talk a lot about her menopause experience and what all that led to, and writing books and just some really cool stuff. So welcome to the podcast, Selene.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Well, we had a fun conversation because you interviewed me for your podcast, hit play, not pause. So you guys should definitely check that one out for sure. But I really want to kind of go back to, lay the foundation before we dive into the really amazing stuff you're doing now. But what was the foundation of even just your writing experience, like writing?
Writing, like
not
books and stuff.
writing.
Yeah, I know. I always have to make that distinction. It's interesting. I always tell people that if I wasn't a writer, I don't have any idea what I would do. I would probably be pulling espressos or working at a flower shop. I don't really know, because that's all I do. That's all I've really ever done. When I was in high school, even in health class or math, people would be like, "Have you considered being a writer?" And I was like, "Oh." So I went to school. I thought I'd actually want to be a doctor. I thought I was going to go pre-med. Yeah. And then I got in there and I'm like, I don't want to go to school that long. But I really, really did love the anatomy and phys classes. So I ended up taking a lot of anatomy and phys and communications. So I ended up with a communications degree with like an English minor and a concentration in sort of anatomy. It's like this hodgepodge of a degree that I have used my whole life, because I came out of school and I became a medical writer. So I was writing for really prestigious journals like Infectious Diseases in Children and, Contact Lens Spectrum and Orthopedics Today. So they were really just magazines designed for different specialty physicians, right? I worked for a series called the Resident Series, where we talked about, I would do a feature on like how not to be in debt for the rest of your life, like that, that kind of stuff. So it really was very exciting to me to be able to marry these passions. And at some point, I decided that I didn't really want to look at all of these, just go to the medical, just sort of speaking to the choir kind of thing that I was doing. I wanted to speak to the lay press. And I discovered that you could do that through places like Women's Health and Men's Health and all of those. So I just kept sending my resume to this company called Rodale Press, who did a lot of that. And they kept rejecting me. And eventually they hired me. And that just kicked off that journey where I was taking the stuff that I'm geeky in love with, the medical stuff and the science and the journal articles, and translating them into applicable things that people can use in their lives.
Well, I think there's so much, honestly, just in that little bit that you're sharing. It's quite a bit, actually, would be the curiosity factor. So, can you tell me a little bit about? So, it sounds like you followed your passions, which led
Yep,
to a job that expanded, and you just follow your passions and you just keep going until
100%.
you manifest what it is that you're wanting. So, I would love to understand the mindset that carries you through that because it probably sets a precedence for the rest of your life.
Yeah, it's not conscious. I'd be lying if I said it was conscious. It was very much just recognizing that I was very interested. I loved science. I loved the human body. I loved all of that stuff. And I didn't want to be deep only in that one field. I wanted to write for a broader audience, right? It was just a matter of putting those pieces together, and it feels kind of like I just fell into it while I was looking around, seeing how I could do that. And every step was a little closer, like going from writing to the strict medical publications to the resident series where I was writing a little more lifestyle science kind of stuff. And then to Rodale was just sort of a natural progression. But you're correct. I mean, when I got to Rodale, I was there and I'm like, I have found my thing. I have found my people. I found the bike racing, which we'll talk about, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And then I was like, but I don't like sitting at this desk having to be here from 9 to 5 every day. Like, this isn't what I had in mind. And is this really the rest of my life? So I found out that some people did this thing called freelancing, and they did what I did, but on their own time. And I thought, oh, and I knew I was disciplined enough. People were like, oh, you have to be really disciplined. I'm like, you don't know me. I'm plenty disciplined. That's not going to be a problem here. So I'm like, all I need is a phone and a computer. And I went and I got like some personal training certifications and a bunch of stuff just so I could get a job at a gym if I needed to get on my feet. But by the time it was like 3.5 years, I stayed in the publishing company, made enough contacts, started freelancing while I was working, and then at some point just flew the coop. 1998, actually, it was. Much to my parents' chagrin, they're like, "You're leaving a job." I'm like, "Yep," because this is what I want to do, and I never looked back. I've been doing it ever
Wow.
since.
So
Mhm.
you've been freelancing from there, and I'm sure, but you're looking for opportunities and doors will be open to you when you start seeking them, right?
A
I
hundred
feel,
percent. I really
I feel
believe that.
like, and you created these opportunities because you're like, this is what I want, and these are the steps, and the doors start opening. I
Yeah.
love this. It's so amazing. And so that is really cool. So let's talk a little bit about the biking piece. Like, how did that evolve from your writing?
That's an interesting story too. So, as I was telling you before we hit record, I always loved riding a bike. Like literally my earliest dream is riding a tricycle in my dream. One of my earliest memories are learning to ride a bike. I love the feeling of being on a bike, and it's it's so trite to say it feels like flying, but it really does to me feel like flying. It feels so free, and there's something that just happens as soon as I start spinning down a road. I can't even explain it. So I've always really gravitated to that. I grew up in a very small town in Pennsylvania where I just used to ride to the lake. It's funny because when my husband and I got together, he rides too, and I took him on those rides I used to do in my flip-flops and my 10 speed. They're so hard. We'd ride 20 miles to the lake, and he's like, this explains everything. Because everything was hilly. I'm in the hills of the Poconos. I didn't know there were flat roads. Anyway, so I always loved to ride. I didn't know that you could actually pursue it in any other way than putting on a backpack and riding to the lake. You know what I mean? Like I didn't know anyone did it. The Tour de France, what's that? I didn't know anything. I
Wow.
went to college, Penn State. I taught aerobics. Just rode around to get from here to there. And once I got that job at Rodale, they had a magazine called Bicycling Magazine. And I met a bunch of friends, and everybody did things at lunch. It was so exciting. Like the Runner's World people would go for a run, and the bicycling people would go ride their bikes. And I just they also had like a little newsletter where people sold stuff. So I bought a used bike from somebody in the company and I joined the lunch ride. And somebody there said, "You're pretty good at this. Have you thought about racing?" I'm like, no. They talked me into signing up. I won my first race, got hooked, and I met the editor who also, editor of Bicycling, also did the lunch rides. My husband, not at that time, but to be, also did the lunch rides. So Bill, who was the editor at the time, said, "Would you like to write for us?" And I said, "Sure." And they started a column called, I was a trainer at the time. He said, "Well, how about you be our fit chick?" And it became Ask the Fit Chick. I had a column in that magazine for almost 27 years.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so I wrote like their training, their fitness, their stuff. I had a blog for a while. So that was a huge part of my professional journey.
Wow.
Even when I left, I was on contract with Bicycling Magazine until like literally a couple of years ago. Like, it was a
Wow.
long time.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
So I hope people can understand how it's such a beautiful explanation of telling people to follow their passions because the doors will open and then it's just something that you're just doing something that you love. Like even
Yep.
it's you're getting paid for doing the passions that you love, writing and biking, and
I
then
feel
the
so fortunate.
I mean it's just so cool. And so, as far as now, let's talk a little bit more about your competitive. It sounds like you
Mm.
definitely have a competitive nature that you tapped into there. Can you share about like your age and when you started
Sure.
competing and what that training was like compared to others? Like, I'd love to get a little deeper into that as a woman.
Yeah, it was interesting because I when I would meet people who I went to high school with and I would tell them the stuff I was doing, they were like, "What?" Because I was not I was a field hockey player and I was a pretty good field hockey player, but I was not an endurance athlete and I did not consider myself one. I hated when you used to have to run like up to the church and back. It was a mile. It was like torture. We'd have to run from the field for a warm up. I was like, I hate this with the strength of seven suns. I hated running so much. Even though I loved biking. So I guess I was an endurance athlete, but I didn't consider that a sport. So we'll just put that to the side. But anyway, I played field hockey. I was, super into like sports on that level. And then like I said, I didn't really do anything until I got into bicycling and they were like, "Oh, you should try this racing." So I started, that was probably, I was probably 26, by the when I started that. I started at the company at 25, 26. So yeah, about 26, 27. And it was an exciting time. Triathlon was just kind of, I don't know if people are into that or remember, but it was all those endurance sports were really just starting to make it into the mainstream, right? People started talking about running marathons. People started talking about doing triathlon. Mountain bike racing was nascent. It was just taking off like cross country racing where you ride off road on trails and you race around trails. So all that stuff was really just coming into the mainstream. And I just was in the right place at the right time with the right people where I just plugged into that scene. So I like ran my first 5K, and then that leads to your next your 10K. And then I did that one race and it led to a whole series in the mid-Atlantic that I was just doing these races. 24-hour mountain bike racing, which is insane. We would do that where there's a team of four people and you go around the clock and
Oh
like
my
ride, racing at 2 o'clock in the morning, sometimes in the rain. You're just like, this is insanity. But it was a super fun time. And I guess I was pretty good at it. Because I got a couple of medals here and there, but I never really thought anything about it. It's just like, oh, like people are like, "Oh, you're really strong." And I'm like, "Oh, that's great." And at some point, my daughter was born. I married my husband, had a daughter when I was about 32, she was born. And I got back into triathlon because I thought it was really fun. It felt like recess to me. I like the variety of like felt really cool to like swim a mile and then jump on my bike and do this run. And at some point I got Triathlete magazine and I was reading this article, which was 100% Lori, like something I would have written, like 16 weeks to Ironman, right? I was like, and I remember I was in this office and my husband's out there mowing the lawn or doing something. I mow the lawn, so something else. But anyway, I opened the window and I'm like, hey, I think I'm going to sign up for an Ironman because I've got this article that says I can do it in 16 weeks. And he's like, okay, whatever. So I find one that's close that has trains similar to me, Louisville, Kentucky, sign up for it, and I I pull the plan out of the magazine because it was actually a magazine. And I go to the pool the next day and I realize I have no idea what to do because I'm not a swimmer. Like I know how to not drown, right? But they have like a workout and I'm looking and I don't even know what it means. It's like I might as well need hieroglyphics on the pyramid. Like I'm like I have no clue. None. So I just thought, okay, I should get a coach. So
Awesome.
I hired a woman who I knew was a swim coach, and I said, Erica, you need to help me. Like, I don't know. And then she watched me swim, and she has no poker face, like I have no poker face. And the look on her face was like, we have a lot to do because I had never learned how to swim properly. Like, I was just literally not drowning, and I would be among the last people to get out of the water. I would just pass everybody on my bike. And the fun triathlons I was doing, she's like, you don't want to do this for Ironman. She was 100% correct. Um, so I hired her and she's like, my husband Craig, he's an Ironman coach. If you hire both of us, we'll just throw out that plan, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay, let's just do this. So whenever you hire a coach, there's an intake process. So they have you give you them whatever you have, your times, past races, any metrics, biometrics you have. I sent all that to him. And immediately he sends back, with these times, if you learn to swim, you could you could actually qualify for Kona. And I
Wow.
was like, oh no, 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 no. Like that's just not what I actually wanted to hear. I was just like, because now the seed has been planted. So
Wow.
16 weeks became 10 months. Like we pushed it out. I am now going to do, 2008, I think it was, Louisville, Kentucky, and I learned to swim. She took 45 minutes off of my swim time because I was
Wow.
just really not good. And it was so joyous to me to learn that you could get out of the water and just feel warmed up and ready to go. It was so it's revelatory. Anyway, so I did every single, as I said before, I'm disciplined. I did every single workout to the letter, did not miss a single one. And in my mind, I know this is crazy, Lori, but the moment he said it, I'm like, I'm going to Kona. And I had no reason to feel that way. None. No, none. I had no reason to feel that way. But I was like, I'm going to go to Kona. So I did all the workouts. I got there. Crazy things happened. Like my bike, the derailleur on my bike, the cable came out halfway through in the ride. And I was having like the ride of my life. I don't know how to fix a thing. I stopped and I was like, oh my God. And somebody came by, like a marshal came by, and they said, we can get mechanic here, but it'll be like 15 minutes. And I was like, no, no, no. And I literally said, God, just get me in the big ring and I won't shift. So I just like, somehow I got a tool. I don't even know to this day what I did. I fixed it, went on my way. I won my age group, first Ironman ever, and went to Kona
Wow.
6 weeks later.
Wow. So,
So, and that was, I was 39 at the time. And after that, I got picked up by a local mountain because mountain bike racing was always my love. I'm a mountain biker at heart. And there were some people forming a team and it was a women's team and it was well supported. And they're like, do you want to join us? And I said, yes. And after that, I raced literally around the world. I did stage races in South Africa and Brazil and Israel and Cuba and British Columbia.
wow.
The next few years are just a blur of sort of racing around the world.
So, so where do I even begin? So when it comes to, So how was your Kona experience? Tell us a little bit about that
Oh,
versus
yeah,
the previous one.
it was funny. It's funny you asked that because it was a bit of a letdown after the Louisville experience, right? Because
Okay.
Louisville was so big. It was, they had probably 2,000 volunteers. There were people stripping you, they had the wetsuit strippers and people lining the streets everywhere you went. It was a wall of noise. It was crazy. And Kona is, I had never been to Kona. I knew nothing about Kona. I didn't know it was just like this little tiny island town. It's just like this little
It is.
island.
It
I'm
is a
like, this
little
is it.
town.
I'm looking, I'm like, this is it. And it's kind of desolate. It's supposed to be desolate. I understand the whole Kona thing now. But when I landed down, I mean, there's literally a picture of me looking out the window, looking at my husband and going, that's it. So it was very disorienting. And it was really like, I woke up that morning, I was like, I'm doing this again. I just did this 6 weeks ago. I'm doing this again. Um, but
Wow.
it was actually better. Like if it had any been longer, it would have been harder. And if it would have been
Yeah,
shorter, it would have felt almost impossible just because of the recovery process. But
sure.
I got to Kona and I was like, people spend their lives trying to get here. I
Yeah.
am just going to soak it in because I'm not going to win. I mean, I'm like, there's no, I'm not even going to see the podium. I mean, I didn't have any delusions of like placing. So I was much more into I am really going to enjoy this. So I went snorkeling and I did things and I didn't just put my feet up in the whole time. I like enjoyed my time at the island and then just enjoyed the experience. The hardest part, well, there were a couple hard parts. It was there were many hard parts as a matter of fact. But the this was when they didn't have the wave starts yet in I
Oh,
oh yeah,
okay.
your face. Oh.
Okay.
So it was like, and I had been warned. Somebody told me they're like, in the other races, at least there's such a disparity in ability that the field thins out fairly quickly. So you're not in the washing machine the whole time.
Yeah.
He's like, but at Kona, you're all kind of the same. He's like, it is like being in the bubbles were unbelievable. Like I could barely see my hands for probably the first 3/4 of a mile. Like it was a long time. We were
Wow.
almost at that yacht before I could see a thing. And
Wow.
then I got out there and I saw there was a woman in front of me. She had a butterfly tattoo on her foot. And I was just like, I am just going to follow that butterfly. I don't care if she swims to Singapore. I'm going to follow that butterfly until it gets me to the like I just want out of this water. And that's all I did. I just like stayed on that butterfly until I got to the shore and we took off from there. And it was an extraordinarily, I know it's always windy there, but it was really windy. There was on the Ahi Drive, there was a guy in front of me going up. A crosswind hit us and he got blown across the road like super fast. And there are people coming down like, what the F are you doing? They're screaming at him. And I'm like, that's not his race plan, folks. Like
Oh,
he
wow.
and he went over the guardrail and into that lava field. And that, yeah, the ambulance came. That ended his day. He was okay. And I was
Wow.
just like, this is harrowing. And then coming down, I've done a lot of crazy things on a bike, but that is probably as scared as I have been. Like I was
Wow.
watching the trees bend and just like hanging on just to not get blown off the road.
Wow.
And then the
Wow.
run is just, I don't know if you've ever done it, but my Lord, that run. Like
No.
I lost my marbles at the energy lab is a when you run down to the whatever that thing is called, like you th- you think you're supposed to be done, but then you have to run down to like the energy lab on the beach and then run back up. It's around mile 17. I I threw away everything. I'm like, I hate this hat. I threw it away. Like I started emptying my pockets and throwing everything out of them. I would have taken off all my clothes if I could have. I just started like losing my mind. I got done and I was just like, okay, this is that's the end of this for me. But it was
Checklist.
yeah, check done.
One and done.
Amazing. Yeah, and I didn't do another triathlon actually for 12 years. I like,
Wow.
yeah, and it wasn't, nothing inspired me after that. And I was mountain bike racing all over the place and then gravel racing. I'm still running. And I went back and did a 70.3 last summer at Happy Valley and State
Half
College because I
half
went,
iron.
yeah, it was really
Okay.
fun. Yeah.
Okay. Just saying the word Ironman makes my heart flutter. That's just the thought. My husband trained and did his first one at 49, and he did, I think, two halves, and really interesting. But the piece of it that I really want to kind of go back to though is really understand, really, really
Sorry, I feel
understanding.
like I'm a fire hose. I'm just like,
Well, I mean, the whole Ironman experience, I mean, it's fascinating to hear, a participant's explanation of what that's like, especially your first one. And you were just like, whoa, is your first race, your first triathlon, you make it to Kona, and you're like, what is this? And then it was like, whoa. So there at 12 years, so you're doing this different type of racing. So for those of us who are less nuanced on the language of what bike racing is, and you're saying
understand.
stages and gravel, can you explain all that and what it is that you love about it and what maybe someone is interested in what that means?
Yeah, for sure. And when people hear mountain bike racing, they often think Red Bull Rampage. They think of what they see on television, like the people
Right.
who are like on top of the world and just pointing a bike straight down into the abyss. I am not doing that, just to be 100% clear. So, mountain bike racing cross country is there's still some pretty technical chicky sections where you're plenty scared, but it's more like you're taking a bike with the fat tires off road. So that can be jeep roads, that can be dirt roads. It's often what they call single track, which is essentially like hiking trails that you're riding your bikes on. And a lot of it is technical, meaning there's logs to jump over or rocks to go down. Sometimes it's steep terrain. It takes a lot of endurance primarily, and also like skill and mental fortitude, because I would do some long races. I did a lot of 100 milers. I did
Wow.
Leadville.
Okay.
Shenandoah is here, that's 100 miles. I did a whole 100-mile series. And what I really liked doing was the stage racing, which means multiple days of racing. So, like the APSA Cape Epic is like 8 days of racing. So you start and there's a prologue, and then you have quite long days. You have each stage is its own little race. So you
Wow.
can win a stage, but not necessarily win a whole race. Like every day has podiums. So at a
Okay.
big race like that, a lot of times you're just gunning for maybe I can get a podium on one day if you can't win the whole thing. There's some of those races I was able, like we have Transylvania and Pennsylvania, which was a 7 day stage race that I've won a couple times, and I got second at a
Wow.
couple in Colorado. But and I then there's some of them you have teams. So I raced with this woman named Rebecca Rush, who is that's her gig. She is a professional mountain bike racer. And we raced Brazil together and we swept the whole race, stood on podiums. And again, we were in our early 40s at the time. So it
Wow.
was I always tell people women peak later. Like, don't underestimate yourself. We women peak later, and endurance is our thing.
Mm, mm. That is interesting because you wrote a book with Rush, correct? Rush.
Yeah, I helped her write her memoir, Rush
Oh,
to
okay.
Glory. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And so I love that. I love that message that women peak later, that we're made for endurance. I mean, that's kind of what menopause does to us, I think. It makes us realize that. So maybe this is a beautiful transition to that whole new aspect
Oh
because you,
yeah, that
yeah,
part.
right? So can we walk into how did you get involved with doing a menopause podcast or, the feisty
Great question.
yeah, so tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like it was a game plan. I just
No, usually never is.
no, no. I thought I might skip it. I might skip that whole menopause thing. But in all seriousness, somewhere along that time when I was doing all of that racing, I also got certified while I was getting all those certifications because I wanted to make sure I had a job if everything else fell away. I also got certified to be a bike coach, and I was writing for Bicycling, as I'd mentioned. And I was at a coaching summit in Colorado Springs, and it was usually I always say this, and sometimes I feel bad, but I don't feel bad anymore. They always had the same guys, the same men come in and give sort of the same presentation, and there wasn't much really for women specifically at that time. Even the women's programs had men in charge of them that would be like, I don't work much with women, but blah blah blah. So I hated going, but I had to go
Oh,
because you got continuing education credits. So I'm going, I think it was 2014, 2000, somewhere in there. And my friend says to me, "You're gonna like it this year. There's this woman named Dr. Stacey Sims who's presenting. Go sit in her conference." So I sat in her session, and she talked about menstruation and luteal phase and hydration needs during the luteal phase and blood plasma changes in women and all the like stuff. She was talking about periods on a stage in front of male coaches. I'd never seen anything like it in my life. And she got off that stage and it was like the Messiah. Like people were following her out the door, like lined up with questions. So all I could think of is like this woman needs a book. Like and I can help her. So I got in line and I by the time I got to her, I just blurted out, I'm like, "You need a book and I can help you write it." And she's like, "Cool." And like literally 2 weeks later, I flew out to Fairfax, California, and we started working on the ideas for Roar, which is now like, became a bestseller. But that was in 2016, Roar came out, and that book was all about women's specific physiology. Women are not small men, how women need to think about training and nutrition and getting strong and their bones and their hormone cycles and all of that. And it was pretty much a soup to nuts approach to women specific active athletic training. And very shortly after that book came out, feedback started coming back to me that one chapter on menopause was not enough. And we were both like, I mean, I think I don't know how I was still racing around whatever. Menopause was not even anywhere on my radar, just not even close. And I was like, well, okay, put it in my pocket, but really didn't do anything with it. And then a couple of years later, uh, I was at a race in Cuba and I went to put my pedal down to punch over a hill like I always did, and the power really wasn't there. I was like, huh, that's interesting. And not that long after that, like all my muscles seemed to go away along with my power. And I thought, that's interesting. I was also waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning and having anxiety attacks, and none of this I wasn't putting any of these dots together as hormones because I didn't know. Like in my mind, menopause, because I was still cycling, I still had a period, I still had a menstrual cycle. I didn't know anxiety. I didn't know panic. I didn't know all these things. Sleep. I had no idea. So when I talked to Stacy, she was like, "Oh, yeah, you have estrogen receptors all over your body and your hormones affect all these things." I'm like, "Why don't we know this?" I'm like, these women
mhm.
that were telling us in this book that one chapter was not enough, they're correct. So so we started, like sort of hashing the idea for another book. At that time, Stacy was also working with Feisty Media. They had an agency at the time, so they were helping her sort of promote her brand. And we all just it was another just synergistic thing where we all came together at the right time in the right place. And one of the people at Feisty was like, "Do you want to do a webinar and all this?" I'm like, "You guys should have a podcast." So I did a podcast. I'm like, "Yeah, let's start it." 2 weeks later, we have the podcast. And then Stacy and I eventually put out Next Level. So it all just kind of evolved like so many things in my life from a personal experience with it and being at the right place with the right people at the right time.
Mm.
But I will tell you, like, there still isn't that much for active women out there. And when I started like looking for menopause advice myself, it was all just like, "Oh, you should exercise." And I'm like, "Okay, yeah, I got that."
Yes, I understand so very much. Oh my gosh. It's kind of like when we were talking, when you interviewed me, I was like, I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do.
Yeah.
And I'm still having these weird, crazy symptoms. And
But
then
some,
it's kind of
yeah,
like you, like where you said, like these symptoms that didn't click because you're still having
right.
your period.
Yeah. And some of the things, I mean, I will say there were some bumpy stretches in there where I was still struggling, and I was like, I don't know if I can write this book, Stacey, if I'm still struggling myself, right? So there was some, she's like, you really do need to start lifting heavy. I'm like, "Oh, okay. So I started lifting heavy, and I started doing some of the other advice that we give in the book, about at the time I was not taking any hormone therapy or anything. But I was starting to use some adaptogens just to calm myself down, and I did have some success with those. And just putting all those pieces together, I felt better. The lifting really did. I'm a big, if you do nothing else, lift heavy kind of person. And I will say that I won a race again at 50,
Wow.
Iron Cross in Pennsylvania, and that was I at that point I really didn't feel like I needed to chase podiums anymore, but that podium was really meaningful to me because I was like, okay, this does work and you still have agency over this process.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's the message, is the agency over the process. That's
Yeah.
great, great wording. Hmm. Yeah, I love that. So, what would be your advice for someone who is an active woman, maybe in this perimenopause, transition menopause
Mhm.
phase, and where should they even begin that journey? Like, where should they start looking at these symptoms and putting those pieces together? What have you seen or heard from people, or what do you guys recommend?
Yeah, I think looking at we have a symptom tracker at Feisty, if people are interested, but I do think that's a good place to start. Is there's so many, you can go to the Menopause Society, just Google menopause symptoms and get it from a medical place, not a doctor who's going to put 400 symptoms online. But there's many different symptom trackers you can use online. And I only say to do that because, like me, there may be things that you are experiencing that you do not know are hormonally related, and that some light bulbs are going to go off for you.
Yeah.
And for myself, once I realized that anxiety that I was experiencing was hormonal, the anxiety got better before I did anything else
Mm.
because I knew what was happening, right? Like, even though I did nothing else, I was like, oh, okay, like I can speak back to this. It's kind of like there was a period when I was getting my period regularly that I felt like my life was ending and I wanted to burn the house down every day. And like, I'd be like, oh, I know what this is. Like, I'm going to be getting my period tomorrow. Like, and then you can just sort of cope with it. You're just not like, I don't know what's happening to me. So it's very similar. I mean, there's a lot of strange things that can be hormonally driven that you would not necessarily put together. So
Right.
it is a good idea, brain fog, people walking around like can't find the word for refrigerator. What is, like this strange things that if you don't know can kind of be kind of scary. So
Right.
looking at that will help you understand, will help you put the pieces together of what you're experiencing.
Right.
And then take stock of where you are. I always tell people, like, just do a little inventory. Like, what are you experiencing? What are you feeling? How are your cycles? And how is it all affecting you? And then the next piece is, what are we going to do about it? You can look at all of the different therapies available to you. Hormone therapy is broadly safe. It is widely available. There are doctors online. If you can't find a hometown doctor who will work with you and go through your risk benefit analysis, that benefit is almost always bigger than the risk. And just start going down the path, but do not suffer. I think the biggest thing is, if you are at a place where these symptoms are starting to disrupt your life, in any way. Women have this way of being like, oh, yeah, but it's just this, just nothing. Your life is worth enjoying, living fully. You do not have to let menopausal symptoms derail you in any way. There's no reason for it. There's no reason for it.
I love this so much. Oh my God. This is a brilliant conversation that needs to be had, to understand you don't have to suffer, right? And like you said, women, we've just signed up. We're like, oh, we signed up to be a woman in this life, so suffering is part of, that's the part of our
It's
fate.
our
Like,
lot in life.
right. what do you mean? I don't have to suffer, and allowing themselves, giving themselves permission to seek
Yeah.
help. But then, being, I think the frustrating part for me was, as I started diving down into their menopause from as a physician portal, right? Like, how can I approach this as a physician, understanding in my own mind how to my lens broadened as to looking at a patient holistically, right? Because most of
Mm.
them, my patients are women, most of them are in this age group, and just really understanding some of these unknown, weird, crazy symptoms that they were discussing. It's not just in your head. It is not,
Oh,
I promise.
100%. And it can go on for 10 years. It can go on a
Or
whole lot.
more.
Or your life.
Or
Oh,
more. And it's insane. And then you start looking at the statistics of women, and now we understand why we were at lower risk for heart disease, and now we're at equivalent risk for men, because I saw that in my own lipid panel.
Yep.
And I
Oh,
had
yeah.
a really interesting patient. She was in her early 70s, and she's like, I think I'd like to come off the HRT. She'd been on it for a long time. I was like, that's fine. We weaned down appropriately. Her total cholesterol went up over 75 points.
I
I am
believe it.
I almost fell out of my chair when I saw that. I was like, you went from being perfectly low risk to like, what? You know? And so it was really fascinating. So I think that's so important, that just the knowledge is power, right? That education is empowerment in and of itself. And then understanding what to do. That's kind of, I went through, there was a research paper made for physicians on how to approach women and how
Mm.
to evaluate it and how to treat it. I was like, this would be amazing information in the hands of the layperson. So I created a 4-page document, literally just walking down,
Oh, that's
what are
great.
your symptoms? It's kind of the same thing. It's a symptom
Yeah.
inventory. It's what is appropriate. Are labs going to be helpful? What are the potential, treatment options? And it's a document that they fill out at home before they go to the appointment.
Yep.
Right. So when you go to the appointment, even if you have a menopause naive physician, which is unfortunate,
Yep.
is the way it is, you can say, here are my symptoms. These are my,
Yep.
and I said, break it down to, 2 or 3 questions. And if you can't help me, can you refer me to someone who can? Because that really
Yeah.
gets to the point that empowers them to make educated discussion decisions. And yeah, so that is so broadly wonderful. I love that, what you said.
And finding somebody who is menopause informed is important because the research is coming out hot and fast right now. Like
Oh, yeah.
a lot of women present with all over joint pain, all over muscle pain, and that was really, really underappreciated just a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And Dr. Von der Wright, who is a friend who I know very well, came out with that paper, The Musculoskeletal Syndrome of Menopause, just
Yes.
specifically to put a word out there so people could have the language about the inflammation and the pain that they're experiencing when estrogen walks out the door and their musculoskeletal system suffers for it.
Right.
It's not everybody, but if that's you don't understand that and the doctor doesn't understand that, you're going to really suffer for that, right?
Right.
So it is
Right.
important to find somebody who is, and just ask,
Yes.
what their training is and what their understanding, because it's quite important. And many physicians are still working off of the dated idea that it's too risky, that the Women's Health Initiative, some people call it, this terrible study. It wasn't a terrible study. We learned a lot from it, but
Right.
all of the lessons didn't trickle out the way they were supposed to. That yes, if you started at the right time, that's a really great thing for
Right.
your, yeah.
Exactly. So much there we could talk about. I mean, I love that she wrote about the musculoskeletal paper. I've read it myself. I've downloaded it. I've shared it with people, and that was my first symptoms that really got my attention,
Yeah.
outside of the sleep, or not the sleep, but the
Yeah.
cycles getting lengthening. But, because everyone just tells you, oh, it's just hot flashes. And those are the main things you worry about. When you understand disrupted sleep, but it's still in the framework of night sweats, which is kind of like the hot flash at night type
Yeah.
thing. So that's kind of where you're in the banter in your head that's going on. And so again, you don't even think about all those other things, and how The Menopause Brain is a wonderful book too. I
Yeah,
love
I
that.
have that.
And so many incredible things come from this conversation, and women feel like, oh my gosh, I'm validated in what I'm experiencing. I'm not going crazy. And to vocalize it, it's okay that you're suffering and need some help. I mean, it's okay to vocalize it. You can talk to
And yeah,
someone.
you should. You should.
Like, oh my
And
gosh.
find community. I mean, it's
Yes.
funny, we have, if I can say
Yes,
the
please.
hit
Yeah.
play not pause podcast. I started a complimentary Facebook group to go with it, private, just like, oh, if people want to continue these conversations. We have 33,000 women in there now
Amazing.
because there's this need for people who are active, who are going through the same thing, and they help each other and they
Yes.
inspire each other. It's so cool to see so many of these women who are like, wow, all you women really inspired me. So now I signed up for surfing lessons, I mean,
Oh
it's
my
cool.
gosh. That's
Yeah.
amazing. I love that. I love it that we are allowing ourselves to support each other and not kind
Yeah.
of
It's
just
so
hiding.
important. It's so
Right.
great. It's
There's
so
so
great.
much,
It's where all the
right?
power comes from. And it's so
Yeah.
good for you.
Yeah. And you're not just, sitting, just taking care of the family and isolating yourselves and connecting to moms only like when you're at your children's events, but you're actually taking time outside of that
Yeah.
and saying, these are my feminine women friends that are going to allow us to work together and build a strong network and support each other through these really fascinating lifestyle changes that are occurring. Because yeah, no, it's mind boggling. Can Is there any other lessons? Because I know that you guys have a feisty menopause road. I can't remember what you guys called it. It's a feisty menopause course or different
Navigate
cohort.
menopause.
Navigate menopause, and
Yep.
which is amazing. But a big part of that was the mindset piece. Could you talk a little bit about what does that actually mean? What does mindset mean in the sense of
Boy.
menopause?
Yeah, well, there's a lot there. There's a lot there. One of the things that I recognized early on, I had on a few mindset coaches and psychologists and psychiatrists and people talking about that before I started the course. And I was like, oh, like we start with sort of the history of menopause and why we all felt so ashamed about it anyway. Why it was such a thing that people were quiet about. Like, why were people embarrassed to talk about being in menopause? Which we could talk all day about that, how it's
Yeah.
just wrapped up in ageism and youth culture and all these ideas that we have about women's value and on and on and on. So, just sort of opening your mind to like, oh, like these ideas aren't even mine. You know what I like? We are just sort of these ideas have just seeped into us, from the way we came up with diet culture and with very much our value being placed on being some young, quiet, reproductive person. And then taking it from that, and then there's this whole exercise we do where we're like, well, what do you think about menopause? And a lot of people use the word end. It's the end of this. It's the end of, and I'm like, okay, okay, it is the end of some things, but is it the beginning of anything? And like it just people wrap their minds around it a different way, and people will then, when prompted, be like, I don't care what people think about me as much quite now, and that's nice, and they start to see some of the more powerful positives that are coming about, and we just keep evolving with the mindset. Like having a growth mindset, having a curiosity mindset. This is not the end, it's the beginning of another phase. And what do you want that phase to look like? Because again, you have agency in that. And it just brings this snowball effect that ends up with women going to Costa Rica and surfing.
Oh
Like,
my gosh, I
it's
love that.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, so just opening the door to the possibility, right, of exploring this in a different way than what
And
culture
exploring your thoughts about it and
yeah,
where did they come from and are they ours and are they true?
so
Are they really
important.
true?
Yes, we're given an identity and we on a plate from culture, from your family, from whatever, and we've
Yeah.
accepted it, we digest it, but we've agreed to believe it. right? So now we're taking back that agreement and saying, I'm
Yeah.
going to choose something else here. But
Yeah,
before
you can tear up that.
yeah, just
Yeah.
tear up that contract and then decide, huh, do I even want to believe anything? Maybe I just want to leave open the
Mm,
exploration, right? So
yeah.
kind of like you did with your life, right? You just like, I'm just following my passions and life will present to you these amazing experiences. I'm like, wow, that's fantastic. Oh, I love that. Well, I will tell you, this is incredible. So, where can people learn more about like all the things that you're doing and all your writings? They're just absolutely delightful. I definitely check out the Menopause. It's going to be so much fun. But yeah, please share where we can learn more about you and everything you're doing.
I think the best hub to go to is feistymenopause.com because that's where you can find the podcast and we have a Feisty 40 plus newsletter. I write that. I write that every week. Next level with Dr. Stacey Sims, that is a good just a good training and nutrition thought process that, we go over like why you should lift heavy, and it's basically all about just sort of picking up, even if you're on hormones, you never really replicate your native hormone, milieu. You just don't. So you have to do some work to pick up where your hormones left off. And that's pretty much what Next Level is all about. So I would say, yeah, those two places, like go to feistymenopause.com. Um, Check out all of our resources there. Check out the podcast, join the group.